Sometimes new drivers see a yellow light and they think that they have to suddenly slam their brakes on, which would startle the person behind them. Hey, it's Jacqueline, and for the next few minutes, we're going to think about 5 mistakes that new drivers make. And we're going to work with the theme over. So I'm going to name those over things now, and then we'll think about them when we're out driving on the road, and we'll talk about what it looks like to match and not be over. So the first thing is going over the speed limit. And you'll hear me say time and time again that we are only allowed to go up to, but not over the speed limit. And that's a mistake that a lot of new drivers make, probably because they see other people going over the speed limit, but we're norming ourselves to the safe standards, not to the way other people might drive. The second over is going over a limit line. We always have to remember that the limit lines are drawn to keep us in our boundary and to keep us away from people's bodies. So when we stop, we're going to make sure that we stop with our license plate behind the limit line, and we're going to use our visual guide, the front left of the car, to make sure that we don't go over. The next 3 overs are all related. So I'm going to start with try not to overreact. It's really common for new drivers to be out on the road and see cars and people and bikes coming from all different directions and want to react very big or over. Overreacting can cause the next 2 overs, oversteering and overbraking. And both of those are dangerous. So we're going to work on not going over the speed limit, not going over any limit lines, not overreacting, so that we don't oversteer or overbrake. Let's get out on the road and see what kind of real life examples we can find. As I'm preparing to make my left lane change, I'm tracking in the left mirror, watching the row of cars, waiting for my perfect gap. And I see that after this red car. And exiting the side, I was thoughtful not to oversteer. I only turned the wheel probably about 1/8 of a rotation to the left. And that was all I needed to get out into the road. And now when I'm slowing down behind this car, I'm being careful not to overbrake. I'm using a slight pressure. And I mentioned limit lines for stopping. I also want us to think about not going over and getting too close to the car ahead of us. So to make sure we don't get too close or go over, we're going to track our windshield wiper, the limit line we're approaching, and as soon as the limit line disappears, we stop. I can do a self-check looking to the right and the left, and what I see is that from the curb cut across to the other curb cut, I can see that a pedestrian or a mom or dad pushing a stroller would be able to cross safely in front of my car. I also see to the left that the car next to me is behind its limit line, and that's a really good way to just assess where we're parked for the moment next to other folks. To the right, we saw a vehicle that did 2 things wrong. They made a right turn from the bus lane over to the right of me, and they started to make their right turn while someone else was making a left turn. So that caused the left turning car to have to pause. Of course, it didn't relate to us, but because it happened right next to us, I just thought I would give you the example of what happens when we go over and don't follow our limits. So right now I'm being thoughtful about the speed limit, making sure that I maintain safe speed. That put me in a great position to yield for the pedestrian that was crossing. And there's lots going on, but I'm not having to steer too much. I'm just letting my fingers guide me forward. For that lane change, I was careful not to turn the wheel too much, too forcefully, avoiding oversteering. And now we're in our stopped position again, so we just make sure the tires are just above the windshield wipers. So new drivers are taking in a lot of new information. It's totally normal to react nervously sometimes. But what we're going to be thinking about on this next stretch of road is to make sure not to overreact. So as I'm approaching, I'm watching for brake lights, I'm watching for pedestrians or bicycles. I'm also keeping track of the cars behind me. And when I think about specifically what over braking does, which is pushing on the brake too hard unexpectedly, it surprises the cars behind us. So remember to always check your rear view mirror when you're braking to make sure that you have a good idea of what's going on behind you. You don't want to accidentally overreact and startle folks behind you. We're going to turn left here and just head into a busier space. And what we're thinking about is how, if we stay within the boundaries and not over the boundaries, we should have a pretty relaxed driving experience. As I'm making this left lane change, I'm going to look in my left mirror and my blind spot, even though I'm in the far left lane, because a bicyclist could come up along the side and I would want to make sure to see them. And then also I just want to point out that I was really careful not to oversteer as I made that slight adjustment. And I always talk about the thumbs. The strategy that I like is to gently move your thumbs in the direction that you want to go in and then gently straightened out. So I call that about 1/8 of a rotation of the steering wheel. Just slightly shoop, diagonal to the left. And that's usually a nice direction to get into that left turn lane. We're going to think about oversteering as we make this left turn as well. When I have my green arrow, the rest of the world will stop for me. I can see long white stripes ahead of me. That represents how far forward I should go with my tires. I'm making a 90-degree left turn, landing just on the other side of that car. So I'll probably turn the steering wheel about 270 degrees. I want to be careful not to oversteer because I don't want to get too close to that car. And I want to be careful not to understeer because I don't want to make a wide turn into the second lane. So I'm turning just enough. And I actually only had to turn the wheel 180 degrees and just hold it gently. When you're out on the road driving, you're not really going to be thinking about 180 degrees and 290 degrees. But you are going to be thinking about matching the rotation of your steering to the demands of the turn and turning just enough, being really careful not to oversteer. And when I turned the corner there, I transitioned from a space of 30 miles an hour to 25 miles an hour. So I'm going to have to be really careful not to go over the speed limit. And if I notice my speed go up to 26, 27, I'm just going to adjust the weight of my foot so I can be careful not to overbrake. And when I came through that last intersection, I got closer to the car ahead of me than I normally like to do. I was trying to creep up and make myself small so that I wouldn't be in the crosswalk. But this time I want to be sure to model not getting too close, not going over our limit. And for me, that looks like the back tires of the car ahead of me just sitting beyond my windshield wiper. So up ahead, we're going to be on the lookout for people merging into the left lane. We won't be surprised. We see that there's a right lane closed sign. And this is the kind of thing that we're prepared to slow down for. We don't want to make any quick, sudden movements. We're tracking the cars behind us. And by just seeing the hazard, predicting the slowdown, we were able to react appropriately and not overreact. So we didn't startle anybody. Sometimes when I'm driving with new drivers, I feel a lot of really hard braking and harsh stops. And that is less comfortable for the driver than just the smooth reactions that we're practicing. Since we just saw our light turn yellow as I was clearing the intersection right now, I would love to take this opportunity to talk about your reaction at yellow lights. That's another area where you want to be really careful not to overreact. Sometimes new drivers see a yellow light and they think that they have to suddenly slam their brakes on, which would startle the person behind them. If you're flowing forward, approaching the intersection, and the light turns yellow, you're going to continue through and clear the intersection, which is what I did at the intersection back there. At this intersection, there was a hazard from the right entering my lane to make their right turn. And even though it seemed like I would have been able to make that turn, the light turned yellow. I was here. There's lots of pedestrians. So my reaction was to stay slow and to come to a full stop. The important thing is to react in a way that is safe for everyone around you, the cars behind you and the pedestrians, of course. So right here, I'm going to think about a right on red because it's clear and safe. And then I'm going to have to react quickly because there are stopped cars in the right lane, even though that's illegal and they shouldn't be there. And I got to model reacting more significantly because I was 2 cars back from the yellow line. I was going slowly because I had just made my right turn and my left lane change. I have been with new drivers who've been in that situation and think to themselves, and they use this language, I have to make it through the light, and they want to accelerate to speed through the light. And that is overreacting to a yellow light. You definitely do not want to accelerate and zip through a yellow light to make it. You want to use your consistent speed, not overreacting in any way, and remembering our other over, which is not going over your limit line or your speed limit. And I love that we are getting so many real world examples. We just had a yellow light that I passed through. I didn't want to overreact and put my brakes on, and I'm really glad I made that choice because behind me a second car followed through. I would not have followed through if I was the second car. I would have yielded to the left turning car. But either way, we made what I think is the safest decision. Well, in our few minutes on the road, we have experienced not going over the speed limit, not going over our limit lines, really trying not to overreact so that we can avoid oversteering and overbraking. And even though there's a lot going on around us, like that car that was changing lanes in front of us over a solid white line, we are managing by just staying aware and staying within our limits and not overreacting. So thank you very much for checking in today to review the 5 common mistakes that new drivers make, all related to being just a little bit over. And I hope that you have time to practice so that you can really get comfortable with your skills. And the more time you spend out on the road, the better driver you'll be. See you again soon. Bye.